every morning with drive. Being on the grind, know I had to survive. We had to win. Started from the dirt and the rubble. I had to be the needle that was popping your bubble.
Hello and welcome into the Rookie Prospect Profile Series, a Zilla Fantasy Elite production. Today, we're going to be looking at wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. in the wide receiver machine learning models for rookies. Brian Thomas Jr. was drafted number 23 overall by the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they come into the league out of Louisiana State University, or LSU. If you've been enjoying these prospect profiles, please hit that subscribe button. We very much enjoy the support. All right, Brian Thomas Jr. comes in at 6'3", 209 pounds, running a blazing 4.33 in the 40-yard dash with a 38.5-inch vertical, 122.2 speed score. The guy absolutely big and fast. That's what we saw in his college tape, running a lot of 9 route slants, curls, very similar to DK Metcalf in his first season in the NFL. Brian Thomas Jr. was one of the more surprising people as I ran him through the machine learning model. So, will Brian Thomas Jr. be a fantasy gem or a mere afterthought? Our machine learning models have the answers. Don't miss the reveal of their verdict. All right, hopping into year one here for Brian Thomas Jr., we can see his minimum comes in at 3.3 fantasy points per game, 5th best in the entire class. And then the 10th, 25th, mean, median, 75th, and 90th percentile outcomes, all 3rd best in the class. So those 7.75 for the 10th percentile. 25th percentile, 9.10 fantasy points per game. That middle range, mean and median, 10.64 and 10.60 fantasy points per game. 75th and 90th percentile, 12.2 and 13.6 fantasy points per game. So getting into some pretty healthy numbers here. And then his maximum prediction here, 17.52 in his rookie season, was number 1 in the class overall. So basically saying, hey, this profile, Brian Thomas Jr., I see this as having one of the best profiles in the class, or the best profile in the class in terms of ceiling, which is kind of shocking for me to see. I didn't have a super high view of him coming into the league. I thought he was more of like a one-trick pony going deep, super fast and big, and that's why he was good. But the machine learning model likes him here. Standard deviation at 2.31 was 38th out of 40 in the class, but his CV at 21.7 was 5th best. So pretty confident in his outputs here. Again, 5th best minimum prediction, 3rd across the board for everything else except for that maximum prediction, which was number 1 in the class. So let's dive into those numbers. What does that 10.6 range look like as an average prediction amongst all year one wide receivers? So again, these are ranked 3rd best in the class. Sitting just below that, Drake London had 10.51 in his rookie season. Marquise Brown, 10.5. Devontae Parker, Kiki QT at 10.4. Aaron Dobson, Christian Kirk, Hunter Renfrow, all at 10.3. So those are just below. Just above, Jahan Dotson in his rookie season, 10.88. Devonta Smith in his rookie year, 10.92. Laviska Shenault, 11.22. Preston Williams, 11.3. These are all sitting roughly in the 45th best overall in terms of rookie wide receiver years. And then getting into that ceiling, we saw that massive ceiling, number 1 in the class for Brian Thomas at 17.52. Getting into the actual outputs, that would end up being 4th best rookie season overall. Just above that is 17.56, which was Puka Nacua last year. So really it's saying, hey, this guy's ceiling could be similar to Puka Nacua in his rookie season there. So 17.56. And the only 2 people above that, Jamar Chase at 17.92, and then Odell Beckham lighting up the league in his rookie season at 24.6 in his first year. Just below that, Justin Jefferson, 17.14, Michael Thomas, 17 flat, and Mike Evans, 16.3. So he's up there in that range in terms of ceiling in year 1. Now getting into his year 2 output, we see, again, minimum 5th rank there, 3s across the board otherwise in year 2. So model likes him. continuing on that particular path. So that minimum 4.10 fantasy points per game, 5th best in the class. 10th and 25th percentiles, 8.67 and 9.97 fantasy points per game. Median bumped up there to 11.79 and the median at 11.85. And then 75th and 90th percentiles, 13.54 and 15.03 fantasy points per game. And then his maximum still increased a little bit, but now it's 3rd in the class at 18.17. So again, minimum prediction is the 5th best in the class, but then everything else, it's saying he's going to be the 3rd best wide receiver in year 2. Standard deviation at 2.47 is the 39th ranked standard deviation in the class out of 40, and his CV comes in at 21.0, which is 7th best in the class. So fairly confident in his numbers here in going into year 2. So we see a little bit of improvement. Who are the fantasy players that we see around some of these numbers? So the 11.8 range and then the 18.17 range for year 2. Looking at that mid-range, just below that value, Kenny Stills 11.6, Deebo Samuel 11.53, Corey Davis 11.5, Marquise Brown again 11.44, Chris Godwin 11.4. Those are guys that we see just below that range. And again, these are hovering around wide receiver 50 overall in terms of second-year players. Just above that, we have Jamison Crowder at 12. Henry Ruggs in his second year had 12.07. George Pickens, 12.28. Robbie Anderson, chosen Robbie Anderson, 12.5. Same with Keenan Allen, 12.5. Garrett Wilson, 12.54. That's right in his median range of outcomes there. That ceiling that we saw at 18.17, where does that fall into range? Well, 18.47 would be the 5th best overall in terms of any second-year player. We're looking at Juju Smith-Schuster. When he blew up in his second year, was at 18.4. Just below that, A.J. Brown, 17.68. DK Metcalf, 16.96. Cooper Kupp, 16.9. Sammy Watkins, 16.8. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 16.73. And then a little bit above that, Allen Robinson with the 4th best ever year 2 fantasy output at 19. Justin Jefferson, 19.44. Jamar Chase, 20.2. And number 1 again, Odell Beckham at 21.3. Now this is where it starts to get interesting going into year 3 and year 4 for Brian Thomas Jr. We've seen him hang around that 3rd best overall with a really good ceiling. Here again, we see in year 3, he's hanging around that 3rd place. But then once you get towards the high end, he is one of the top 2 players in the entire class in terms of ceiling for year 3 outcomes. So that minimum prediction, 4.67 fantasy points per game, is the 4th best in the class. He was the 4th wide receiver drafted, so that kind of makes sense. Then the 10th, 25th, mean, median, and 75th percentile are all the 3rd best in the class. Those are 10.32 fantasy points per game for the 10th percentile, 25th percentile at 12.37 fantasy points per game. Those are already pretty solid numbers for a year 3 player, I guess. Getting into the mean and median right there at about 14, mean at 13.98, median at 14.22. Pretty good numbers. 75th and 90th percentile outcomes, 15.88, 17.22. And then looking at that 90th percentile outcome, that 17.22 is ranked number 2 in the class. And again, he's coming in with the number 1 ceiling in the class at 21.09 in year 3. Standard deviation, 36th best at 2.65. And his CV at 19 is pretty low, 4th best in the class. It's actually really confident in Brian Thomas Jr.'s year 3 profile. We don't hear a lot about Brian Thomas Jr. because we got the big 3 that went, Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors. They gobble up a lot of the chatter about who's better. And then we had those guys just after Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, Xavier Legette, Lad McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, Keon Coleman. Those guys all are getting chatted about because they had interesting landing spots, maybe getting drafted a little bit earlier. And then we just get Brian Thomas Jr. kind of sitting in the middle of nowhere, not being talked about. But his profile is really good. The machine learning model loves him. And it'll be really interesting once you get to see the year 3 prospects here. But let's get into his year 3 outlooks. That 14 fantasy points per game range for his median outcome. Who are some other comparables that did that in their year 3? Just for reference, this is getting around wide receiver 30 overall in terms of any year 3 player in the last 11 seasons. We get guys like A.J. Brown at 13.92, DJ Moore at 14.1, Marquise Brown at 14.14, Jalen Waddle 14.19, Stephon Diggs 14.2, Devontae Smith 14.23. I haven't said Jarvis Landry's name, but he's been hovering right around that fringe area of Brian Thomas Jr.'s profiles here. Jarvis Landry sitting there at 14.3 fantasy points per game. Just a little bit below that, Jerry Jeudy, 13.61. Michael Pittman Jr. in his third year, 13.53. Brandon Ayuk, 13.4. T. Higgins, 13.13. Getting into that juicy ceiling, though, the 21.09 was the best in the class. Where would that sit? Well, 21.09 would be the third best ever for any year 3 wide receiver. The only people above that, Deebo Samuel at 21.19 and Justin Jefferson at 21.69. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown at 20.68 is the next below there. DeAndre Hopkins, 20.6. Tyreek Hill, 20.5. Keenan Allen, 20.2, Michael Thomas, 19.7, Chris Godwin, 19.6. Pretty good company there on the ceiling prediction for Brian Thomas Jr. And again, the model is pretty confident in those results. And this is where it really gets interesting. Brian Thomas's year 4 output, really see him shine here. We do see kind of a double peak here in terms of his median output. We see one peak followed by another peak with a little split in the middle, but that's fine. His minimum prediction in year 4 is actually the best in the class at 4.29 fantasy points per game. Basically saying he's, maybe more one of the bust-proof wide receivers in this class. 10th percentile at 8.52, also best in the class. And we have a handful here at second best, 25th, mean, median, and 75th percentile outcomes, all second best in the class. So 25th percent, 10.09 fantasy points. Mean and median, 12.10 and 12.23. We do see a little step back from his year 3 output here, but we see that a lot with the top end receivers into year 4. The 75th percentile outcome, 14.05 fantasy points per game. His 90th percentile outcome there, again, getting into the high range, number 1 in the class at 15.75, but his maximum output, 20.57. Anything over 20 is very good, but that is 4th in the class. So again, seeing him towards the high end here, but this is the first time his maximum has been there at the ranked 4th overall. Standard deviation, 38th best at 2.82, and his CV, 4th best in the class at 23.3. So again, this is where I say it gets very interesting. Brian Thomas Jr., as I said, I didn't have a super high opinion of him coming into the league. I thought he was more of a one-trick pony deep shot, more likely to have a profile that's not going to do well in the league, more chances or more opportunities to kind of fail. The model really loves him. It's saying he's one of the better ones in terms of minimum predictions. And then as he progresses throughout the NFL, he's probably going to get better and better than his counterparts. So very interesting profile here for Brian Thomas Jr. It certainly changed my outlook on him heading into my rookie drafts. So hopefully these machine learning models that you've been seeing are giving you that little bit of additional confidence in your analysis that you're doing for all of these incoming rookies and your dynasty rookie drafts. That's going to do it for today's rookie prospect profile on Brian Thomas Jr. presented by Zilla Fantasy Elite. Thanks for tuning in.